Ben Arbib of Nurture Brands and Rebel Kitchen. Welcome to Brand Growth Heroes. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, thanks. Thanks for having me.
It's wonderful to have you on. So look, Ben, we've invited you today because you've got a really, really interesting business model with Nurture Brands, and one which is particularly interesting at the moment, given the difficult economic circumstances, I think, for lots of founders out there who are finding it really tough to scale, particularly, very small brands in that early stage of growth, when you've started to get a bit of traction, but you haven't quite made it to the 5 million mark. But before we get into that, tell us, how did you get into food and drink? How did you start your company, Rebel Kitchen, and why did you start it? Take us on that journey.
It was quite an unconventional route into the food industry. I spent most of my 20s actually as an investment banker and then a tech entrepreneur in a very different industry, in the betting industry. But I must say that was kind of like my sort of business university, I'd call it. 10 years of just learning a lot of probably what not to do in the startup world. That actually led to quite a major burnout at the last credit crunch. So 2008, I'd say. I spent a couple of years on the sidelines just sort of licking my wounds. And that led me to food, because it was just a point in life where I think I started to have to, look after my body a bit more. I wasn't feeling particularly great mentally. And that really sort of ignited a passion in food and nutrition and what we put in our bodies. Because I did notice that, that made me feel better just from a whole mental point of view. If you ate a really clean diet, it does make you feel better. Mm-hmm. So I got quite into food and understanding the food systems. And really that led me to, being in a position where I felt maybe I could do something to help, which was, I think, big food, not by their own fault, but if you look at where food's come from in the last sort of 50, 60 years, it was a very kind of locally grown supply chain. It was quite healthy because we were all eating, unprocessed food. And then, post the Second World War and kind of like, as sort of, I'd say the Industrial Revolution really started pumping, we started to sort of denature food. And I think that's really where human health suffered, everything from agriculture to the way we process food. So I got really interested in understanding soil health. And that's why I'm quite a big believer of the organic movement.
You grew up on a farm, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. I grew up on a farm, so I've always been pretty close to nature. And, I ended up, in the city of London, living in the city, and it really didn't do my health good over, nearly over a 10-year span. And
So how did you get from that? So you taken a couple of years off, you're in the sidelines, you're licking your wounds, you're understanding, kind of reconnecting with this idea probably of how you grew up, in terms of nature and soil and what you put in your body and makes you feel better. How did Rebel Kitchen get born, as my 3-year-old would say?
So I lived in central London, so I was kind of spending quite a lot of time in the big Whole Foods on High Street Ken, which was kind of like the mecca of and if you think that I'm talking, this is like 2012, or probably 2008 to 2012, in that kind of period. And, it's come a long way in the last decade, but, it was a really interesting kind of time to see the kind of products. I grew up, thinking like drinking a can of Coke was absolutely fine. And I think it probably was fine when that product was developed, because we weren't sitting in front of computers all day. We were doing a lot more manual labor. And really the opportunity for Rebel was, my ex-wife and myself, we had a young family. So we were really interested in children's nutrition as well. And so we were going to Whole Foods all the time. And I was looking at all these products on the shelves. I was like, actually, a lot of these products aren't that healthy. A lot of people don't have a lot, nutrition and health is really confusing. You read something like the Daily Mail and you see coconuts are a superfood one week, and then the next week there's a completely conflicting article telling you it'll give you heart disease or something like that. So I think there's a lot of confusion in the world of health, and it's kind of a word that's been slightly bastardized. So I was noticing a lot of the products on the shelf were in the health sort of category were probably you could throw them into 3 buckets. One, the sort of old school health products kind of tasted a bit like cardboard. So it was quite hard to get someone to kind of come from eating something maybe not so healthy into that kind of product. Yeah. And there was a lot of products on the shelf that I'd say were masquerading as health food. So yeah, they had great, pretty packaging, but you look at the ingredient deck, and I would say it wasn't particularly honest because there was just a lot of added sugars. But
Like
dressed up,
the first iteration of granolas,
exactly, yeah. There's just like loads of different sugars, but there'd be
palm
like
oil
different
and
types of sugars.
sugars. Yeah.
And I'd say the last bucket were really good products, but they were really expensive. And I just think they were kind of like, they were products that were never going to be sold to mass market. And ultimately who needs, help with their health. And it's kind of like the guys, that are shopping in like, the major retailers, that are probably buying the processed and maybe the more unhealthy food. So that was really the opportunity. I thought, I asked myself, is there a brand out there, an overarching brand that, I trust? And, there were some great brands that were sort of dealing with individual ingredients and were kind of named around those ingredients. But I couldn't really think of like, who's the Apple, who's the Nike, those brands that you kind of like, you grow up with and you really trust. You just know they're going to be awesome products. So going back to your question, how did Rebel emerge? It was kind of that, but also from understanding what was broken in the food chain, which was like, I can understand why big food companies don't put their end consumers' health at like the forefront of every decision. Because if you read some of the ingredient decks, why does it need so much sugar and salt? Well, it's easy because people love sugar and salt and it makes them repeat purchase, but that's probably not doing them too well. So really the idea behind Rebel was, can we put, people and planet at the forefront of every decision? And that was actually luckily how we came across B Corp. We traveled in the US and I started to see, I used to go to Expo West and I kind of see this little bee logo and kind of got interested in it. And it had just come over to Europe. I think it came over in 2013 or 2014. And we were really interested. So we actually, when we originally founded Rebel, we were, I think, in the second cohort of European B Corps. So probably in like the first 50 to 100 B Corps in Europe.
That's amazing.
And that really kind of gives you an understanding of, or a framework of how to like, build your business and think about people and planet on every decision. So
you're probably one of the first food and drinks brands in the UK that was working towards B Corp.
Yeah, I imagine we were, yeah.
So this is what date are we now? So 2012 was when...
2013 was kind of like the acorn of the idea, and we had the first product on the shelf 2014. But really, like if I go back to the sort of original value set of Rebel, it was, obviously the products have got to taste great, number one, or no one's going to buy them. They've got to be made in an ethical and sustainable way. We kind of dropped the affordability. I mean, we wanted the product, not just to be in Whole Foods. We wanted to have a chance of getting into the major grocers. So it had to be, affordable. Obviously high quality ingredients.
You fell for the trap. You fell for the trap that all founders fall for, which is I wanted to be accessible to everybody. I wanted to look amazing. I wanted to have no unnatural ingredients. And it's difficult, isn't it, to make all of those things happen when
you end up with a really slim margin because you have to get it on the shelf at a price, but you don't want to, you want to put the best ingredients. So yeah, I know a lot of, entrepreneurs that suffer from the same problem in the early days.
So let's talk about what was the range at that point.
So we came up, we actually kind of walked into the alt milk market, which was quite interesting because back then it was pretty much Alpro and a few other brands. I mean, I don't even think Oatly would really come across to the UK. But we had an idea just from our young kids. It's like we were literally only in our fridge for our kids. We had water and coconut water with the two. We thought juice was a bit too high in sugar, so we were trying to actually formulate a sort of healthier drink for kids. We came up with a milkshake, which was literally 4 ingredients. It was water, coconut milk, cacao, and date syrup was the sweetener.
Okay.
And, compare that to a normal milkshake, which is loads of sugar, loads of dairy milk. And it was a great product. It was like, I think it's what got Rebel was famous for its chocolate milk in the early days. We did little 200 ml Tetra packs, and then that turned into like an adult 330 sports cap. And then we did obviously different flavors across the range. And
so originally it was a kid's product, was it?
It was actually an interesting strategy because we couldn't see any competition for that kind of product. So we thought we could turn up to somewhere like Waitrose with that and get on the shelf. If we turned up with an adult milkshake, we thought actually they could point to a load of different products on the shelf and say there was competition. And it actually worked because we got into Waitrose probably within 6 months of launching. But yeah, so that was the first range, and then we actually did a acquisition, which was our coconut water. So our pink raw coconut water, which was an amazing product. I'd found in the US there was a brand called Harmless Harvest, which was an HPP product. So if you're familiar with coconut water, most coconut water, like Vita Coco, is pasteurized. It's boiled to 150 degrees, kind of ends up sort of slightly caramelizing the fruit sugars. So it has a very specific taste. Still tastes okay, but if you're used to drinking, if you got into a tropical location and drunk a fresh coconut, our pink coconut water is just it's just straight out the nut, because we don't use heat to process it.
And is that still the product that you have today?
That is the one we have today, yeah. And we have, as it's one of our main products in our portfolio, we actually do a lot to give back to the Philippines. So, I mentioned B Corp, but we're also a member of 1% for the Planet, which means we give 1% of our revenue to environmental causes. So we actually direct that 1% revenue to the Philippines, and we help our coconut farmers basically to farm in a more sustainable way, intercropping, things like that. So
the Rebel portfolio today, then, how does that stack up versus what you originally launched? And in terms of what are your big revenue drivers or margin drivers today, and how different is that from when you started out in 2013?
Well, we've been through a few different factories, I'd say, and the ranges have expanded and contracted, and we've lost a range. I mean, we went into yogurt. I mean, that kind of leads, I suppose, to where Nurture Brands, we had a year probably in our fourth year. So we had a really, I'd say, a successful launch, period of time. I think we did 500,000 in our first year, 1 million in our second.
Wow, that's really good.
We kept doubling to a point of getting to about 3. And then we had really big plan to double the business again. And we'd launched this yogurt product, which was amazing because it was taking the byproduct of the coconut water, which was flesh. Mm-hmm. You blend it up. And we created these really nice yogurts. But I think looking back, that was probably a mistake, because I think if you're a yogurt brand, you probably want to be focusing 100% on yogurts and really going deep into yogurts. And we had coconut milk drinks, and we had coconut water, and then we were going into coconut yogurt. And
which makes sense. You can understand why you would do that. And there's lots of founders who say to me, I'm in crackers, and I'm also going to be in crisps, and I'm also going to be I'm looking at hummus and dips and with crackers. Yeah. And you say, don't do it.
Well, it's, we went from being, you've had a long life product in the milk drinks to a relatively long HPP 90-day shelf life product. So suddenly going to 28 days, which means you've got about 12 days to get it, to sell through.
That means you've 2 different supply chains, right? You've 2 different skill sets in the business. You've got 3 different buyers, potentially.
Yeah. So the team's grown, and then suddenly it's the smallest revenue line in our business, and we probably are spending 80% of our brain power on it every day. And it just got to a point where the factory, the quality was not good enough. So we ended up killing it, which was a hard decision because it was a great product.
Yeah.
It was the right decision at the time, but that also meant that that particular year we didn't double the business. We actually just sort of tread water, but we'd obviously scaled the team and the whole cost of the business. So that's really that leads us to the juncture of how Nurture Brands was born. From being on this journey, I kind of understood. You have an original business plan. Your business plan is never going to go exactly the way you think it is. It twists, it turns, and
sure.
you've got to be prepared to pivot. In my case, I had a couple of things going on that year. We didn't double the business. We stayed still. We'd hired a load more people, so our losses increased. And plus, I was actually, my marriage got into trouble, and kind of I wasn't divorced as yet, but that was kind of emerging. So that that's obviously quite
yes, your headspace. You're focusing on 2 different projects at once.
Position to be for I know there's a lot of founders out there that do go into business with their partner, but you got to think about when that happens. It's hard to unravel your life alongside a business. So that was sort of a major distraction for both of us that were in the business at the time. So I was kind of speaking to people in the industry, being like, look, we've got this, what looks like a successful business, but we're still losing money. And every time I think I'm going to get to that break-even point, it still seems as far as it was when I was, went from 1 to 2 million. And I thought I was going to go from 2 to 4 and would be kind of cash flow positive. And it just, it's a hard industry because, if you don't own your own factories, you're going to have a pretty slim margin. By the time the retailer's taken their margin, you got your logistics cost, you got your team. The fact is, when we throw in when we don't own our factories, we know roughly the sort of net margin will be 20%. That's throwing everything in, obviously X team and marketing. But that's not a lot. I mean, if you look at our whole business model, we actually give away 2% of our revenue a year, 1% for the planet, and being carbon neutral costs us 2%. So we're actually paying away 10% of sort of the contribution from every product that we sell. So
at gross margin, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's not a lot. There's not a lot to go around. And with a big team, and if you got a marketing budget, yeah, like I said, our original plan was well off. The break-even point was well off because I was thinking the break-even point for Rebel would be like 3 to 4 million. And I think on our cost structure, it's probably 7 or 8 at the time. So things needed to change. I had to pivot. And
Can I just ask you a question on that, just because it's an interesting one? What was it that you were missing in terms of your thinking? Because all of those founders are out there right now thinking their break-even point is going to be 3 to 4 million, but actually it's 7 to 8 million. What weren't you factoring in?
There's always a decision internally, right? Because it's everything from, like I said at the beginning, we had a very strict value set of how and what we'd put in products, right? So suddenly you get a bit of, we've had massive inflation the last year, but inflation, so you absorb the cost, or, we need one more person, or 2 more people, or...
So just underestimating things like inflation and people necessary to grow the business.
Yeah, but you never, in your line, you may have like 1% you're writing off a product, and then we're doing yogurt and we're writing off, 25% of everything we're producing. So there's just stuff that pops up at you and it just erodes that margin, and there's just less to go around. So
I think it's really important because everybody goes through this. And there'll be so many founders out there listening to this thinking, well, I was thinking I would be breaking even at 3 to 4 million. And so I'm trying to get to pin down, or what are the extra things they need to think about when they're building those scenario analysis?
We overhire. If I look back at my, and I much prefer to talk about mistakes rather than the successes, because I think that's what people can really learn from. We definitely overhired. Like, we had way too many people for the amount of, revenue we had. But like I said, we had 3 different supply chains, 3 different factories, chilled and ambient, right? So you needed a certain amount of sort of human capital in the business.
Yeah, you did need it, but actually it's just you'd made decisions that diluted your focus across categories, and people don't realize that you can't use necessarily the same supply chain ops person.
But then you do, to get from a certain size to a certain size, you need those people. Otherwise you'll just be treading water below 1 million turnover. So it's a really tricky one. And that brings us perfectly to Nurture, right? Yeah. And that's how really Nurture came about, because you go on the trade show circuit, you start getting friendly with a lot of the other founders and people in the health food sector. And, I was seeing everyone was suffering from the same thing, which is, the growth trajectory is not a hockey stick. And I'm fortunate to see a lot of business plans from, new space. And I always advise them not to do that hockey stick. I know the reason is you kind of need the hockey stick to raise the investment, because people don't want to invest in something that's just going to be a really slow diagonal kind of like grind over like a decade or even 2 decades. And, I'd always like. Let's explain
the hockey stick concept for anyone out there who's feeling that they don't understand. They don't want to ask the question.
What I see in most people's business plan is they kind of spend the first couple of years building at quite a slow pace. So maybe they're doing 100,000 or 200,000 in the first year, and that may build to 300 or 400, but then in the second year, but then maybe in the third year, you see that hockey stick go to like 1.5 million, and then in the fourth year, it's like 4 or 5 million. And, you have like this hyper growth. So, it goes like that rather than what I'd say is it's just like it probably over 10 years, because the thing with the grocery game is it just takes time to develop a brand and, get the awareness. And, you're not always going to just get multiple listings and keep them. In our case, we've been in and out of nearly all the grocers with different ranges. It's just how it works. You're never going to get it.
So back to that list of what things we need to factor in when we're building that worst case scenario, right? Or probably most realistic scenario. We need to factor in, it's going to take longer.
it's
We
going
need
to
to
take
factor
longer,
in.
and then cut your cloth accordingly, right? So if suddenly you're not thinking you're going to do 3 million in the third year, you're actually going to be at 1 million. Would you have 10 to 12 people in and an expensive office or whatever? Because that the minute you've taken those 10 people into your business, and you've got an office rent and all the things, all the costs
associated
that come with that. That could be £400,000-500,000 worth of central overhead. And in the case of when I was saying you're going to be making 20%, that means you definitely got to be at 3 million to be breaking even. And so if you tread water at 1 million for a few years and that growth doesn't come through, it's pretty hard to unwind that, because everyone's probably going to be on 3 months notice. You've got an office lease. So
and then the other thing that people don't understand, I think, or they don't consider, is that when you're trying to, unfortunately, let people go and downsize, it takes 6 months of senior management time or founder time to work through that. And then your eye's not in the ball of driving growth.
And raising money, because a lot of people are on that, they're on that kind of 1 year to maybe 18-month cycle of needing cash. But to raise cash, it takes 6 months usually, and it's a lot of of the founder and usually a few of the senior people in the business not really focusing on what's going on in the business. So back to nurture. It's really that's the whole model. Nurture Brands is a cohort of now 8 better for you drinks and snacks brands, and what we're doing there is taking brands that perhaps have been on that journey where they kind of, for us, we like to have seen them to scale at least 1 million of revenue, because we think there's clearly consumer demand at that level. But most of the brands we've kind of inherited or purchased have kind of had the same life cycle, which is they've great ideas, great brand. It's just the growth hasn't come through when they thought. So they've gone and they've done their friends and family round. They may have done a bit of seeders or Crowdcube, and then in many cases gone actually to private equity and actually raised that big chunk of cash. But that's when the clock really starts ticking, because if you take 2 or 3 million off a private equity company, they expect results in the kind of agreed business plan. Yeah. And if that growth doesn't come through and you run out of money again, that's a pretty sticky situation for a founder, because you've either got some pretty pissed off shareholders that kind of are like, we invested all this money with you, and you've created a much smaller business, and everyone, there's always valid excuses why the growth didn't come through. Dealing with big grocers, they can't promise you listings. Like, you think you're going to get a listing, but you don't know when it's coming. We're 10 years into Rebel Kitchen, and I'd say our coconut water product is hopefully going to go national in the next 12 months. And that's taken nearly 8 to 9 years to get there. So yeah, a lot of these businesses just run out of road with their current cost structure. They've hired too many people. They've got too much cost and too little revenue. And therefore the margin contribution to fund the cost of running the business just doesn't work anymore. And so how Nurture Brands works is we aggregate brands onto one platform, because we all need those central office functions, finance, marketing, sales, and operations. It's just we're mainly UK focused, and we have great relationships now with all the grocers. A centralized warehouse. It's third party, but it's we don't have any of our own factories. But ultimately, a lot of these businesses can literally just plug into our platform.
I think it's important that we talk about which businesses are those 8. Let's call out for those 8 brands so people can imagine this. And then the other thing is do you acquire them, or do they rent your services? How does it work?
So we've acquired all of them. We find that we need to have full control to make it worth our while, because obviously every sort of acquisition or integration does take a lot of bandwidth out of the team. So we're 8 brands. So the founding brands were Rebel Kitchen, Ape, and Emily. Emily focused very much on sort of vegetable crisps and snacking. Rebel's more of a beverage, organic beverage, like I said, milkshakes, milk, and coconut water. We've got Miracle Kitchen, which is actually our US sister brand to Rebel Kitchen. It's just we had a trademark issue over in the States, but that's kind of our overarching US brand, where we'll take any product from any of our brands. It will always go under Miracle Kitchen in the US. We've got an ethical chocolate company called Doising Dam that joined us late last year. We've got Jack's Cocoa, which is another coconut water brand, but that's an interesting company. All their revenue actually comes out of the Taiwan, Hong Kong, and mainland China.
Their revenue does.
Yeah. So that's opening the door to Asia for us, because we're not. Although a majority of our revenue does still come from the UK, we are very much an international business now. Okay. We got Primal Pantry, which is like bar company, like clean label sort of fruit and nut bars and protein bars. We recently did 2 other acquisitions at the end of last year, one being Abacus Seaweed, which is a really innovative seaweed snack. Really great. If you haven't tried it, please try it. And Indie Bay, which is a spelt pretzel brand.
I like Indie Bay.
So yeah, we're playing in a lot of, but you can see it's I say it a lot. It's kind of like an ethical, sustainable PepsiCo. We have drinks, we have snacks. When you've got those 2 things, you're kind of, in many cases, talking to one buyer, front of store buyer. But they all share, one common thread, or a number of common threads: plant-based, better for you. When I say better for you, we're just trying to create healthier versions of your everyday kind of drinks and snacks. Like I said, it's really hard to say what is healthy these days, but you'll definitely understand all the ingredients on any of our products. That's health. So what's your vision? Talk to me. What is your vision for Nurture Brands? Because you have a really exciting vision. Yeah, the vision is, if you look across food, who are the big food companies? They are doing exactly what we're doing, but just in a much larger scale. Coke, Pepsi, Unilever, Nestle, all these kind of companies, they aggregate, multiple brands on one platform and then sweat their overhead across all of those brands. And that's what we're doing in a micro scale. And we don't even own our own factories yet, because none of the brands are scaled. But the idea is, I suppose, to own, being, if you've got your own, if you're a single brand, which I was when I had Rebel Kitchen, I had some pretty sleepless nights, because at the time we were hugely Waitrose, focused brand. So if I looked at the pie chart of risk, yes, we had 2 or 3 product ranges, so the revenue was split between those ranges, but had one main customer. If they turned us off, we were dead. So when I look at what we've got at Nurture, is actually we've got, all the brands and all these different supply chains and all these different customers now globally. And if you put that in a pie chart, not one little wedge of the pie chart really scares me, because even if it got turned off, we wouldn't lose our business overnight. We'd just lose a small revenue. So I think that's the big difference between, an individual brand to what we've got going on. Yeah.
And you're also spreading the risk across category, and you're spreading the risk across seasonality. You're spreading the risk internationally.
Yeah, and then the other big thing, I suppose, is and definitely what I've seen in the past sort of 12 months, is as we've, our whole portfolio is now going to push through 10 million of revenue. You become a more meaningful customer to the big grocers, which ultimately are where all the big volume gets driven. So rather than, just speaking to junior buyers, we have more meaningful chats with people higher up in those organizations, and they obviously like what we're doing, because we are. I hope you can see we're like genuine about our environmental and health concerns, and hopefully we want to be a great partner where we're like a one-stop shop for any sort of healthy drinks and snacks.
So 10 million now. What's the plan in 10 years' time?
So it sounds a big number, but I do believe we can get to 1 billion inside, I wouldn't say 10 years, but I mean, next step will be 100. But I do believe we can scale this, not just with the brands we've got. I think, the strategy clearly is, it's a buy and build strategy. So we'll always acquire other brands, but we'll also, organically grow, what's working. And that's sort of going back to the strategy again, not every brand will make it. In fact, we've actually retired Abe this year. I didn't mention that, but that's been retired. We actually took its best product and made it a Rebel Kitchen product. But so not always will we acquire brands and keep them, because obviously brands are hungry mouths to feed. You know, you've obviously got to innovate, and you've got to, you know, constantly, you know, work on evolving the brand. So in some cases, if we find a really interesting like supply chain and product, but maybe the brand's not strong, we can actually just bolt it into one of our existing bigger brands, which gives it, you know, a wider footprint in the grocery store, and there's maybe a more loyal following because it's been in the market longer. So there's many ways to do deals, but yeah.
Talk to us about deals then. So how does this work for the founder? So say I'm a founder and I am really struggling at, you know, 1.5 million or 3 million, and I can't see a way through this. I'm losing heart. You know, how does this work for me? Do I get cash? What do I get if I come to you guys?
To date, we've really only done pure equity deals. So yeah, we're not going to be the guys paying you many multiples of revenue. It's just not the game we're in. But I think what we can offer, you know, a brand that perhaps maybe you know, towards the end of the road, they're struggling to get funding, mainly because of the situation that we discussed earlier.
Yeah.
We offer them a small carry. So you become part of the Nurture family, you get Nurture brand share. So no longer are you just, you know, you got exposure to that one brand that you're bringing along. You then get a piece of all of our brands, which, like I said, I think is a nice position to be, because we've got a really great portfolio now. And that's really how it works.
So they're taking a bet, that the founder's taking a bet that Nurture Brands has a better chance of scaling their baby than they do, and that actually their equity share is more valuable in Nurture Brands than in just their own brand.
Well, yeah, because you may be in a place where being like, I'm not even sure if my brand's going to make it over the next 12 months, right? So what we can guarantee is your brand will make it probably over the next 10 years, and we can give it a good push because, you know, I've been in this industry 10 years now, and you know, I'd like to say I've really got a great team now, and we've got great relationships, like I said, with the grocers. So maybe in a time where you've had to shrink your team, you know, you haven't delivered the plan you thought you would. And if you're thinking about, you know, options, then yeah, we'll always take the call and have a look. But like I said, we can't. I'd love to look at everything, but we have to have seen 1 million of annual revenue to have a look, because.
So this is your first criteria then. They've got to be hitting 1 million. What's the next? It's got to be plant-based.
Yeah, plant-based.
It's got to be better for you.
The healthy thing is just like, can I understand all the ingredients on the side? And you know, we can always improve the supply chain, but you know, is it ethically and sustainably sourced? And that's really like the major checkpoints to like, does it pass go?
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's exciting. I mean, but I think, you know, yes, we've got there by buying smaller brands so far, but I think now we're kind of growing up a little bit. We're actually starting to look at sort of more sizable transactions, which will be how we'll, you know, I've set the team a challenge to grow 20% organically a year, and we'll acquire 20%. So if you compound that, you can see how it rolls up quite quickly to, you know, maybe 14 next year and 20 the following year, probably 30 the following year. So yeah, there's also a plan to perhaps IPO it along the way as well. So
wow.
a lot of the employees do have options in the company. That's important to me, and they will need a route to liquidity at some point. So. Talk to us about the employees then. So how do you make sure that those employees have the same passion and authenticity, and that comes across to the consumer base in the same way that those brands would have communicated or engaged consumers when the founders were in charge of that? Well, I think that's what's nice about, you know, being using business as a force for good is, you know, when people come into Nurture, I think they generally see we're for real. So once they see how we operate and also how we treat our employees, you know, internally, and everyone else externally, it does the work. Like, I don't like to say, you know, the analogy, they drink the Kool-Aid, but it's genuine, you know. Once you come into the business and you feel how we run it, you know, I'm in there, you know, half the week, I'm chatting to everyone in the team all the time.
Are any of the founders still in the business?
Yeah, we actually have one founder. I mean, at any point in time, we've actually had, of the 8, well, there's probably 7 brands we've acquired so far. We've actually had 3 founders that have stayed for at least a year in the business and then, gone their separate ways. So we've actually, what's really nice is we've actually, if you think about it, we've got, I want to hear like what's gone wrong. I don't want to make the same mistake twice. So yeah, we're friends with every founder. And in some case, one's still on, actually two are still on, 2 are board members, one's in the business still. So 3 people are actually still, in the business.
Lovely.
We go and see the others on a regular basis as well. So we kind of know what went wrong before we own these businesses. So we're never making those same mistakes twice, which is
what happens to the debt that the business has. So, for example, if it has, friends and family loans or investment, or it has investment from, angel investors, equity. How do you manage that?
We're not gonna. Yeah, I mean, today we haven't really had that situation. I don't think we've really had that. If there is debt, it usually will get converted and then converted into their company's equity, which will then get converted into Nurture Brands. But
okay.
every deal is very different, and we'll look at everything on its own merits.
Yeah. Okay. I suppose as well, when you go out and you crowdfund, if you don't succeed, the people who invested in your business lose their money. Or if you borrow money from friends and family, or they invest in the business and you don't succeed, they lose their money too. This is just an interesting one, isn't it? Because I'm imagining that there's people out there kind of thinking, I want to pay back the people who have given me this money. How do I do that?
So ours is a long-term bet. So I suppose in those sort of cases where it really is near the end of the road, so there's a big chance it could go into administration and therefore maybe the brand won't live on, to have a small amount of Nurture Brand shares. And if we deliver our plan over 10 years and become like the next, ethical, healthy PepsiCo, maybe those shares go up, by many multiples over the next decade or 2 decades, and you actually have a massive return.
Yeah.
So yeah, they may be underwater when we do the deal because it's just, that particular business may be near the end of the road. But that's why we kind of like structuring it like that, because everyone has a chance to make a return. It just may, you just got to be patient.
Are there some economic rules in all of this that, are kind of a givens that founders just aren't taking on board, particularly in food? I know there's more margin in beverages, the more, not necessarily juices, but the more water there is in a beverage, the more margin there is in it. What are the economic rules that people are missing in terms of, you've got to get to X size in order to break even, because these are the margins, you said 20% earlier. You've got to have this many people. What can we always create a bullet list of things that people need to avoid doing or do?
Yeah, like I said, people costs are always going to be probably the thing that's that can get out of control quite quickly, and you can get a bit excited about the prospect of your brand because maybe everyone's saying amazing things to you at big grocers and things, but then suddenly that range review gets pushed. Or the thing is, if you look at the last 3 years, the amount of crazy unknown stuff that has just happened to us was just, I'm not sure we'll live through a period like that again. Maybe it's a new norm, but we had COVID that cut the business in half, cut our revenue in half. We're impulse drinks and snacks. No one was on the streets needing impulse moments. We had an Asia heavy supply chain, so lots of containers coming from Asia. At the back end of COVID, suddenly all the container prices went up nearly 400% or 500%. So you had all this stuff. So there's always the unknown. So I think when you're building that business plan, there's just an unknown sort of disaster fund I would always have because you don't want to put it in there, but it will, you hope it doesn't emerge. But in looking back at every year, even before COVID, there's always something going on.
Okay. So it's basically overestimating revenue and taking on too much as a result in terms of cost base.
So the ones I have seen a few that have been, actually got to profitability just beyond £1 million, but they were literally founder, they literally are the founder and a couple of employees, and that's it. And they've never gone, above their means. It's just it's very easy if you've gone and been lucky and got a really nice investment round away and you've got 7 figures sitting in the bank account, you kind of want to spend it. And I think the other area I'd say that probably looking back in the old days, marketing, it's really, really hard to see if it works. So you want to, as a new brand, you want to get out there and you want to spend on marketing. But if you don't have national distribution, a lot of that money falls through the cracks because, in our case, let's say we're educating, we don't have national distribution on coconut water, and we go out, beating the coconut drum and spending £500,000 on outdoor media, and someone says, oh, coconut water sounds good. Then they go into their local sort of Asda or Morrison's and they'll go to find coconut water and there'll be one brand there and it's not yours because you're not on the shelf there yet. And they buy a competitor. So I'd say for me, you can spend a lot of money on marketing and not really get a return. You can also spend a lot of money on hiring a too big a team, which you need at certain points, but just make sure you time it right.
Okay.
And then have a little disaster fund because there's always going to be that, factory ringing you up and I don't know, your formula hasn't worked or something or whatever it is. But they're the kind of things that for me can, get a bit out of control. But yeah, and like I said, when you're plotting that when you're plotting your business plan and growth, it definitely my experience of it is it's a slow grind over many years. So I'd prefer to see it, plotted like that than, a sort of really vertical hockey stick in year 3 or 4.
Well, that is just super advice. It really is, Ben. And it's been lovely to talk to you today. Thank you so much for joining us and wishing you all the best in creating the next 1 billion PepsiCo, but much, much healthier and more sustainable and a better lot of snacks and drinks for us all to consume. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure to be on.